Wherever the dawah of God is, there is Iblis, there's the devil. Wherever there's Adam, there's Iblis. Wherever there's Abel, there's Cain. Wherever you have Joseph, you have his brothers. Or wherever you have Moses, you have Pharaoh. Wherever you have Jesus, you have Judas Iscariot. Wherever you have Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, you have Abu Bakr and Umar. And wherever you have the Imams, you have Harun al-Rashid and the rest of the tyrants that existed, that usurped the caliphate in their time. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد الأئمة والمهديين وسلم تسليما. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, my dear brother Mahmoud.
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Thank you for joining me.
It's a big honor to me.
The honor is all mine. So today we want to continue talking about the topic of the sunnahs that are found in the Qa'im. And remember, we had mentioned that there is a narration that says that in the Qa'im is the sunnahs of the prophets and the messengers. And so we find that the stories of the prophets and the messengers and those things which we found emphasized in their call in the Quran or in the traditions from the Ahlul Bayt or from the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, or in the Bible or in the Torah, we find that these things were left for us so that we can navigate or learn from them or know that these things will be repeated in the time of the Qa'im. And so we spoke about how many traditions say that in the Qa'im there's the sunnah of, for example, Noah, or the sunnah of Moses, or the sunnah of Jesus, or the sunnah of Muhammad, or the sunnah of Yunus, or the sunnah of Salih. One of the narrations one of the prophets that the narrations focus on the most when it's speaking about the Qa'im having a sunnah from this particular prophet is Yusuf. And we find that the traditions which speak about it come in various forms and they point out various things. For example, there's one narration that says that in the Qa'im there's a sunnah from Yusuf. And then it says, and it is imprisonment. And so we find here the narration is basically stating that it's possible that the Qa'im, or in fact it is going to be the case that at some point in time the Qa'im will go to jail, right? He will be imprisoned for one thing or another, just as Yusuf was imprisoned in his time. You have another narration saying that in the Qa'im is a sunnah from Yusuf, and then it explains that the sunnah is satr, or concealment, right? That his matter is unknown. Other narrations clarify that he will be walking in the streets and the people will not know him, but yet they'll see him. Other narrations basically specifically state that that which occurred with Joseph from his brothers would repeat itself in the time of the Qa'im. The Qa'im would have to face from this Muslim nation, which the narration compares that they are the likes of swine. He would have to face from them the same which Joseph faced from his brothers in that time. So we have these various narrations that are emphasizing on this likeness. There's this repetition of the story of Joseph in the time of the Qa'im and in the life of the Qa'im to him. So let's examine then the story of Joseph really quick. Let's recap it for the believers and for all those who are watching. And perhaps there are those who know nothing about the story of Joseph. So let's recap that, and then we'll analyze it and see what is the point, what is the sunnahs that we must watch out for, what are those things that could repeat itself in the life of the qa'im. Basically, there's a prophet, his name is Jacob, and Jacob ends up having several wives, and 4 to be exact, and he ends up having 12 children. These 12 children they are basically his successors. They are his sons. He has 12 sons. They are the forefathers of the 12 tribes of Israel. Each one of them is a nation. Each one of them is a tribe. They're strong. They have a lot of the good qualities that their father has. They have learned at his hand. They are the sons of a prophet from God. He ends up in the, and by the way, from these sons, there comes, from their lineage comes many prophets and messengers. For example, you have, later on, you have Aaron, who comes from the tribe of Levi. You have Moses also, who was from the tribe of Levi. You have Jesus, who, according to the Gospels, comes from the tribe of Judah, right? And as such. So he ends up giving birth to his 11th son. His wife does, his wife Rachel, and they name him Joseph. And Rachel also ends up having another son who she calls Benjamin. And that's the 12th and the final. And so this son of theirs, the 11th son, Joseph, he ends up becoming the favorite of his father. And Joseph ends up having these dreams. He has several dreams which he narrates to his brothers, and he also narrates to his father. The most famous of them being this dream which occurs in which he sees 11 planets, and he sees the sun and the moon, and he sees them all prostrating to him. And he informs his father of this dream. His father knows the interpretation of it, and the interpretation of it is that he is the successor of his father. His matter is much greater than his father's. He is a prophet. He is the inheritor of basically Jacob and Isaac and Abraham. And Jacob tells him to be careful not to inform his brothers of this dream and of this matter, because if they find out, they're going to be extremely jealous, and they're going to seek to harm him, or they're going to plot a plot. And so we have in this, a couple things that we would like to extract and point out on. And that is that the Holy Quran shows us right there that there is a danger sometimes that is associated with narrating good dreams, because there are people out there who won't wish good for you, and that could, plot a plot for you or seek to destroy you on account of a divine blessing that is coming to you from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And so we have narrations from the Ahl Bayt alayhim salam that say, don't narrate your bad dreams. And here we have an example of, in the Quran, where we're not supposed to narrate necessarily our good dreams to just anybody and everybody, because some people will have bad feelings. We have also here something that's very important to point out, and perhaps one of the most important lessons in the entire story of Joseph, and that is that even though you have children that are the sons of a prophet, and the prophet, he has to be the best of the people because he's their imam, he's their example, he's their guide, right? He's the face of Allah in creation, even though their father was the face of Allah in creation, and they grew up in that household. They still ended up suffering from jealousy and from envy. And so just because your father is a prophet does not make it the case that that father will not have unrighteous children, right? So the child of an imam, the child of a prophet or a messenger, it's not always the case that he will be righteous. And that's an important thing to note here. Here we also find that the sons of Jacob see that the matter of the successorship is in the hands of Jacob himself. It's by his choice who he appoints as his successor. And they are all fighting for that position, wishing to be the inheritor of their father. In the story, they are jealous of Joseph and they call themselves, they say that they're a strong gang or a strong bunch, like why is Joseph getting all of this attention? And so they are looking at the exterior, seeing themselves better than Joseph, in the same way that Iblis saw himself better than Adam. Because of his exterior power and the apparent of that which he was created from. And so the sons see themselves as powerful, hardworking, muscular, big, tall, handsome. And they see that Joseph is, young, he's small, he's weak, he's not as built as they are, and they see themselves as better than them. But God sees that which is in the heart of Joseph and has ordained it to be the matter, of Joseph, to ordain the successorship to be that which is, of Joseph's matter. And it doesn't matter also if Joseph is born much later on. God does not differentiate or does not necessarily choose the firstborn to be the successor of the prophet or the messenger or the imam. So the story moves on. Joseph makes a mistake because he's a child, and he ends up informing the brothers of the dream which he had. And this causes them to do exactly that which Jacob was worried about. It causes them to plot. And they come up with a plan. And the plan is that they are going to kill Joseph. And so here you have the sons of a prophet are conspiring to commit murder. And that's exactly what they do. They conspire, they agree with one another. They ask Jacob for permission to take Joseph out with them one day. And as they're on their way, they are about to kill Joseph when one of them gets cold feet. And he says, don't kill Joseph. Let's just do something else instead. Let's sell him, as a slave to a passerby, or, let's throw him in the well. And they decide that they are going to, instead of murdering him, that they're going to make it look like he was eaten by a wolf and banish him essentially from the presence of his father and from his family, never to be seen again. And so here you are, you have them not only conspiring to murder the successor of their father, and not only being containers of envy, but actually conspiring to kill, to murder a prophet from God, Joseph. So you can have some really bad children come from the prophet, just like you had, but this also shouldn't have been a surprise for people because we had already an example of that in the story of Cain and Abel, the sons of Adam, or at least to those who grew up in the household of Adam. The sons of Jacob end up throwing Joseph in a well, stripping him of his shirt, covering it with blood of a lamb, and they take the shirt back to the father after they leave him in the in the well to die, or to be lost forever, or to starve to death, or to be picked up by some passerbys. And they end up going back to the father. They say that Joseph was eaten by a wolf, and they show as evidence of that the bloodied shirt. But unfortunately, they were not that intelligent, and God always makes criminals make mistakes. And so there were no really cuts in the shirt itself. It was just stained in blood. And so Jacob, through that means, knew, and because he was a prophet from God, knew that the sons were lying to him. He also knew that they were filled with hatred and jealousy towards their brother. The sons eventually go back to the location of Joseph, where he's in the well, and they end up selling him to some traders that are on their way to Egypt. And these traders end up buying off of them Joseph, and they sell him to a wealthy family that are in Egypt. Jacob is mourning the loss of Joseph, and he's crying. And he cries so much that the narrations state that he basically loses his eyesight because he's constantly crying. Joseph now, he is taken in. He's bought as a slave boy by a couple, what they call the Potiphar. And, he was one of the advisors to the king, him and his wife. They couldn't bear any children. It seems like the Potiphar, the Aziz of Egypt, this man, his privates didn't work. He was not able to basically have any relations with his wife. So he was more like a eunuch than he was a man, and so his wife, she was deprived of any sort of satisfaction as a wife should have, and so they decided that they would adopt him as a son rather than a slave, because she longed so much to bear children, but she was unable to. But something weird happened as Joseph grew older in their household, and that is that Joseph was bestowed with like a lot of beauty. He was one of the most beautiful people that lived at that time. The narrations, the Jewish narrations and also the Muslim narrations state that he was given a third of all the beauty of humanity on the earth. The people were bewildered by how handsome he was, and they thought that it was something which is inhumane. There was this special attractive quality that he had. He would just attract people to him. And so the wife, the line became blurred for her between Joseph being a son of hers to being somebody that she was actually sexually attracted to and wanted to be with. With the lack of any sort of treatment as a wife or any sort of marital relationship in that regards, she ends up trying to seduce Joseph on many occasions. And the Quran even states that not only was she thinking about Joseph, but Joseph was also thinking about her. And so this tension between the two of them reaches a climax at some point where she basically traps him in her bedroom and she proceeds to attempt to seduce him. She wants to have sexual intercourse with him. He becomes frightened of God at that moment. He remembers God and he becomes frightened of him and he wishes to escape. He is horrified also at the concept of betraying the man whom he was raised in his house. And so he decides that he is going to refuse. She's persistent in wanting to continue to sexually assault him. And so Joseph begins to escape and he runs away. As he's running away, she chases him down the hallways and she attempts to grab him by the back of his shirt, and she causes a tear to take place in his clothing from the back. The noise of chasing him down the hallways grabs the attention of the guards and eventually the Potiphar, and they all come to judge the case. Well, a wise man ends up saying that, look, what's going on here? The wife she's frightened and she's angry at Joseph for refusing her. And so she says, and her name in many of the narrations is Zulekha. Not just, by the way, Muslim narrations, but also in particular versions of the Torah that is written, old versions, her name comes up as Zuleikha. So Zuleikha, she is very angry at Joseph for refusing her offer. And she decides that she is going to accuse him of attempting to rape her, to save her own self, and also to get him thrown in jail. It was one of those, traps that was set up by a woman who was vengeful. And this also is an example in the Quran of how sometimes lovers who do not get that which they want can become vengeful, and they can accuse people of things that they did not do. And so in this case, she's the one who was the criminal. She's the one who wanted to cheat on her husband. She is the one who wanted to have sexual relations with Joseph. And even though she succeeded in seducing him to a particular degree, Joseph was not willing to go all in and have sexual intercourse with her. And so she ends up being the criminal who tries to portray herself as a victim and to portray Joseph as a rapist or somebody who's a sexual offender. And so she brings forward this accusation against him in hopes that he goes to jail with the philosophy of, if I can't have him, then nobody should have him. And luckily there was a wise man there, and the wise man, says, okay, well, what should we do now? She's making this accusation. Joseph is saying the opposite. He's saying that she's the one who was attempting to rape him. How can we judge in this case? And so he says, if the shirt is torn from the front, then Joseph is guilty. If the shirt is torn from the back, then he was trying to flee, and she is the one who is guilty. And there's another version of the story in which there was a child, a baby that was brought forward, and the baby was asked to testify, and the baby spoke from the cradle, and the baby testified in the favor of the innocence of Joseph. Nonetheless, in the end, Joseph was proven to be innocent, and the Potiphar knew in his heart that it was this woman who was guilty and that Joseph hadn't done anything. Nonetheless, his jealousy of Joseph and his feeling less of a man caused him to be ungrateful to how good of a son Joseph was all these years to him and all the services that Joseph had provided for him. And he decided that he was going to turn against his own son. In a rage of anger, his voice changed. He became demonic in nature. He made great threats against Joseph. He would proclaim himself to be the great one, and he decided that he was going to put Joseph in jail anyway, and he sends Joseph to jail.
SubhanAllah.
Joseph in jail ends up spreading the dawah. He's calling people towards monotheism. He's teaching them about God. He's interpreting dreams for the jailmates that are in this cell with him. People are trying to deceive him, trick him, tell him at times false dreams in order to prove that he's not a prophet. He interprets these lies and false dreams anyway, and they fall exactly as he interpreted them to be, thus proving that he was a prophet and that when he says something, it comes to pass regardless. And this was a sign of him truly being from God. He makes a mistake while he's in jail. one of his cellmates was being released, and so he asks his cellmate to intercede with him, with the Pharaoh, so that he can come out. For that reason, God causes the cellmate to forget about the request of Joseph and to not mention him at all to the Pharaoh. And in fact, what ends up happening is that God's wrath falls upon Joseph. He gets punished and he ends up abiding in jail for another few years. The period of time in which he was in prison, he ends up it ends up being extended. But God forgives Joseph, and in the very end, what happens? Joseph ends up being released from jail, and he ends up actually, the Pharaoh ends up hearing about the reputation of Joseph as being this great dream interpreter and wise sage. And the Pharaoh of Egypt had these dreams which he kept having, which were troubling him. And nobody in the land and nobody from his magicians or his advisors or astrologers were able to interpret these dreams for him. And so he ends up summoning Joseph out of jail, hearing his story, judging in his favor, declaring him innocent, putting him next to him as his number 2 man, as his advisor. And basically making him in charge of all of Egypt, and recognizing that he was a prophet, and he ends up adopting his religion actually. And this ends up being a period of prosperity in Egypt where Egypt also, the religion changes from being a polytheistic one to being a monotheistic one. And then in the end, Joseph's brothers, who many years now have passed, they end up going into Egypt to trade, etc. And Joseph recognizes them. He ends up bringing them into his presence. They see Joseph, but they don't recognize him. And the last thing that they imagine was that their brother survived and is still alive and ends up being right now like the number 2 man of all of Egypt. And so they did not recognize him, even though they were speaking to him, but he recognized them. They, just like the narration, had pledged allegiance to him when they were in Egypt, but yet they did not know him, but he knew them. And they didn't recognize him until he said to them, "I am Joseph." And basically Joseph ends up hiding one of the cups that belonged to the palace in the bag of Benjamin, and then arresting Benjamin, as part of a plot to force the brothers to bring forward their father to Egypt, and in order to get them to confess to the great crime that they had committed to Joseph. And in the end, Joseph is reunited with his father, and he's reunited with his brothers, and he forgives them, and they end up prostrating to him as a fulfillment of the dream that he had had when he was a child. And so now in this narration, the story of Joseph and his brothers, we can understand that if this story was to repeat in the time of the Qa'im, or aspects of it was to repeat, we would know now that this is nothing to be surprised about or to be concerned about. For just like Joseph was imprisoned, so could the Qa'im be imprisoned. And in fact, if the Qa'im was imprisoned, this would not be something to use against the Qa'im, and it would not be something which would make his imamate false. In fact, if he did go to prison, this would only be a further proof and confirmation of who he is. Joseph was accused of sexual assault and rape. And so if the Qa'im had went into jail because of that type of accusation, that shouldn't surprise anybody, nor should that make anybody doubt. For those same types of filthy accusations were brought forward before by the Potiphar and by Zuleika against Joseph, and yet Joseph was innocent. He was falsely accused. Rather, those who accused him were the ones who were guilty. So hearing these types of accusations against Joseph by members even of his own family, or people that were related to him or that raised him, or people that were supposed to be close to him, should not alarm anybody. For in the very household of Joseph, there was envy against him by his brothers, and they sought to murder him. And so there has to be a sunnah of this that occurs in the time of the Qa'im. The brothers of the Qa'im in this time, they have great envy also against him. They seek to murder him and assassinate him. Whether this is physical assassination or character assassination, both are one. Rather, the narrations from the Ahlul Bayt alayhim salam said that character assassination is more harsh and worse than physical assassination. To attempt to kill somebody's body is much less than the pain that occurs to a person when they try to destroy his reputation and destroy his character in front of all people. And so we should expect that out of envy, those people whom were supposed to be close to the father of Joseph, or the father of the Qa'im in this time, end up betraying the Qa'im and end up betraying the father of the Qa'im, end up making a campaign to assassinate Joseph, assassinate the Qa'im and his character, accuse him of horrible things, and that is something which is to be expected and is totally and fully normal. In fact, we find that in the times of the Imams, peace be upon them, there were some sons of the Imams. Like there was a son of Imam Ali alayhi salam whose name was Muhammad, son of al-Hanafiyyah. Muhammad ibn al-Hanafiyyah was somebody who declared himself to be the Imam and tried to steal the imamate from Zayn al-Abidin. You also have the example of Abdullah, the son of Imam al-Sadiq, and you have Muhammad, the son of Imam al-Sadiq alayhi salam. Both of them falsely claimed the imamate and tried to proclaim a position for themselves that did not belong to them, even though the matter had belonged to Musa, their brother after Ja'far. You have in the time of Al-Hasan al-Askari alayhi salam, you have a brother of Al-Hasan al-Askari whose name was Ja'far the liar. Ja'far the liar was a man who made all kinds of theories and proclaimed himself to be better than Al-Hasan al-Askari alayhi salam, and tried to steal the imamate from him and basically misled a bunch of people. And so we have to be careful from this, because their sunnah was a repetition of that which happened between Joseph and his brothers, and what happened with Joseph and his brothers, and what happened with Musa Kazim, and what happened with Ali Zayn al-Abidin, and what happened with Al-Hasan al-Askari alayhi salam from their brothers will also occur in the time of the Qa'im. Perhaps there were people who were appointed as Mahdis even, who were in that time supposed to be brothers of the Qa'im, that turn against the Qa'im, and they actually try to assassinate his character and throw him in a well and proclaim his matter to be dead out of the great envy that they have. But their plot will never succeed, and in the end, his matter will still rise and it will continue. And so, accusations of sexual abuse or rape, being fought by children of an imam or children of a prophet or individuals who were formerly believers in the da'wah. And on another scale, being denied by the Muslims in general. The Qa'im, in one of these narrations, it specifically states that even though the Muslims and their scholars had, they knew about the matter of the Qa'im, and they recognized him, and they would pledge allegiance to him, and they would proclaim their faith in the Qa'im, except that in his time, he would pass them in the streets, and they would not recognize him. They would see him on TV or on the internet. They would watch, because some narrations state that everybody would see the Qa'im while he's sitting in his own home, and they would be in their own homes or in their own places. So obviously, this is a reference to social media and a reference also to television in that time. They would be sitting in their place and they would see him, and yet they wouldn't recognize him as being the individual that they were waiting for and that they proclaimed faith in and that they believed in. Even if the Qa'im was to be imprisoned, or accused of anything, it is only a repetition of the same story that took place before.
SubhanAllah. Like Imam Ali, when he said, describing the Qa'ims, the companion of Egypt, said, لا يبصره أحد وهو معهم, nobody sees him while he's between them. And يصبر صبر الأولياء, he have the patience of the awliya, which is referring to the prison and referring to the being shown in front of everybody in their houses, on TVs and social media, but they do not recognize him.
Exactly. And I think that if people, accepted as just or accepted as true every accusation that would be against the Qa'im or against the Mahdi, if the mere existence of an accusation against him disproved his da'wah or his claims, then we have to say that all those things that were also said against Joseph would also disprove him and disqualify him from being a prophet. We would also have to say that the accusations against the Prophet Muhammad of being a charlatan who changed verses in the Quran and who basically sexually assaulted children, and these accusations that are against him, that he was more worried about sexual pleasures, and that's why he had so many wives, and that he was using magic and mind control to control his people. We would have to also say that these accusations, prove false the claims of the Prophet Muhammad, peace and blessings be upon him and his family. And Jesus also was accused of using the devil as a source of his power. And he was accused of being a great Dajjal, a misleader, a teacher of falsehood, somebody who was, even according to some interpretations of the events that took place at the time of the arrest of Jesus and the fleeing of the naked fugitive, some people have interpreted it to be a case where Jesus was also being accused of being, somebody who was abusing children or young ones. But that's for another episode to discuss. They made accusations against Moses too, that he was a murderer, and yet he really did murder that individual, but still he had accusations against him that he was a terrorist and he was a traitor to the crown. And so accusations against the prophet or the messenger or the imam or the hujjah of the time in order to discredit them is not something that is strange. It would be strange if there were no accusations against them and they had a clean picture and they were embraced by the people. If Iblis wasn't sending people to fight against the dawah of God, then it wouldn't be the dawah of God. And this is something which was mentioned by Imam as-Sadiq alayhi salam, where he says, that if I don't find the authorities knocking on my door, then I should accuse myself in regards to my own religion. If I don't find the government, Satan, and his companions coming to attack me, then I should really wonder if I'm on the right path or the wrong path. Because Iblis is a sworn enemy of the truth. The Prophet Muhammad said, those who love me and follow me, they have to expect trials and tribulations to rush against them. The Ahl Bayt alayhim salam said that if one of our Shia was living on the top of a mountain somewhere, God would create for him a neighbor that would harm him. And so wherever the dawah of God is, there is Iblis, there's the devil, and his companions. There is envy. There is wherever there's Adam, there's Iblis. Wherever there's Abel, there's Cain. Wherever you have Joseph, you have his brothers. Or wherever you have Moses, you have Pharaoh. Wherever you have Jesus, you have Judas Iscariot. Wherever you have Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, you have Abu Bakr and Umar, and wherever you have the Imams, you have Harun al-Rashid and the rest of the tyrants that existed, that usurped the caliphate in their time. So we'll stop there, Mahmoud. Thank you for joining me again. God bless you, and inshallah we'll meet again on a future episode.
Thank you so much.